Hi, my name is Jennifer Scott, and I never thought my quiet life in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon would unravel in a courtroom drama involving my own brother and the neighbor I trusted like family. It all started with a garden. Not a farm, not a sprawling estate, just a modest backyard garden filled with tomatoes, beans, and wildflowers. A place that smelled like summer evenings, where bees hummed lazily and kids sometimes chased each other through the rows of vegetables. But for my brother, Michael, that garden was not just a patch of land. To him, it was an opportunity, a prize, a way to get quick money. And when he couldn't charm or bargain his way into taking it, he turned to the one weapon he thought would work: the law. Yes, my own brother sued our neighbor in an attempt to steal his garden. At first, I thought it was a ridiculous threat, something he said in anger but would never follow through on. But when the envelope arrived, the heavy cream-colored envelope with the words Circuit Court of Multnomah County stamped across the top, my stomach dropped. This wasn't just sibling bickering anymore. This was real. And the truth, as I would soon discover, was about to come crashing into the open. I grew up in the same two-story blue house I live in now, tucked at the end of a quiet street lined with maple trees. My parents, Arthur and Linda, bought it in the late 70s, back when Portland was still more lumber town than coffee culture. We were an ordinary family. Dad worked in construction, Mom ran a small bakery, and my brother Michael and I spent summers running through sprinklers and winters huddled by the fireplace. Next door to us was Mr. Johnson, a Vietnam veteran with a slow drawl, a crooked back, and the kindest eyes you'd ever seen. He moved in when I was 10, carrying little more than an old pickup truck and a box of tomato seedlings. From the moment he arrived, he treated his backyard like sacred ground. Year after year, he turned that soil into something special. By the time I was in high school, his garden was the pride of the block. Neighbors would stop by to pick up fresh zucchini or just to sit on his porch swing and sip iced tea. He never charged much. Sometimes a few dollars, sometimes nothing at all. Food tastes better when it's shared, he used to say with a grin. To me, his garden wasn't just vegetables. It was proof that patience and care could transform even the hardest soil into something alive. But Michael never saw it that way. My brother had a restless streak. While I worked steady jobs, paid bills, and built a life that was simple but mine, Michael was always chasing the next big thing. A business that would change everything. A risky stock trade, a side hustle he swore would make him rich. None of them ever lasted. By the time he was 40, he was drowning in debt, driving a car he couldn't afford, and moving from apartment to apartment whenever the rent fell behind. Mom and Dad bailed him out more times than I could count, draining their savings until there was almost nothing left. And then, one summer evening, as we sat on my porch watching the fireflies blink across the garden fence, Michael leaned over and said the words that started it all. You know, that land never should have belonged to Johnson in the first place. Grandpa used to own it. I've been looking into it. I think we could take it back. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, told me he wasn't. Michael, I said, Mr. Johnson bought that property years ago. He has the deed. He pays taxes. It's his fair and square. He smirked. Deeds can be questioned. Boundaries get blurry. You'd be surprised what a good lawyer can argue. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the summer breeze. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Michael spending more time at Mom and Dad's house, poring over dusty boxes of family papers, maps, and old photographs. He started telling them stories, twisting bits of truth into something darker. He convinced them that Grandpa had only loaned the strip of land to Mr. Johnson, that it was never a real sale. And the worst part? My parents believed him. Michael just wants what's rightfully ours, Mom told me one evening, her hands dusted with flour from the pie she was baking. I stared at her, stunned. Mom, you know that's not true. Johnson paid for that land. He's been working it for 20 years. She shook her head, her lips pressed thin. Sometimes paperwork doesn't tell the whole story. That was the moment I realized my brother wasn't just playing games. He was pulling our whole family into his lie. 1 week later, Mr. Johnson came by with a basket of cucumbers and tomatoes, his usual gift whenever his harvest was too much for one man to eat. He looked tired, though, his shoulders heavy. "Got this in the mail," he said, handing me a folded letter. My heart sank when I saw the court seal. Michael had done it. He'd filed a lawsuit, claiming that Mr. Johnson's garden, the very soil he'd tended for decades, was family property unlawfully withheld. I wanted to scream, to march straight into my brother's apartment and demand he stop. But I knew Michael. Once he sank his teeth into something, he wouldn't let go, not until he either got what he wanted or destroyed everything trying. That night, I sat on my porch long after the sun went down, the scent of tomatoes heavy in the air. I thought about the man who had given me advice before every job interview, who had fixed my mailbox when vandals knocked it down, who had shown me how to grow basil in little clay pots on my windowsill. And I knew, if Michael wanted a fight, he wasn't just going to face Mr. Johnson. He was going to face me. Because this wasn't just about land, this was about decency, about standing up for the truth, even when it meant standing against your own blood. The day of the first hearing was etched into my memory with uncomfortable clarity. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, crisp air carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves. Downtown Portland was buzzing with commuters, but inside the Multnomah County Courthouse, time seemed to move slower, heavier, as though weighed down by the tension in the hallways. I had never been in a courtroom before. The polished wooden benches, the high ceilings, the solemnity of the seal behind the judge's chair, it all felt intimidating. I sat in the back row, heart pounding, watching as Michael strode in with his lawyer, looking too smug for someone about to commit perjury in front of a judge. He wore a tailored navy suit I knew he couldn't afford, probably rented, and carried himself with a false confidence, shoulders squared, chin tilted just enough to suggest superiority. Behind him, my parents shuffled in, looking both nervous and supportive, clinging to the story Michael had fed them like it was gospel truth. Mr. Johnson arrived a few minutes later, walking slowly with his cane but upright, dignified. His lawyer, a woman named Rachel Porter, greeted him warmly, helping him into his seat. I caught his eye, and he gave me a small nod, as if to say, "Thank you for being here." When the bailiff called the case, Scott versus Johnson, my stomach knotted. Hearing my family's name on one side of the courtroom and our neighbors on the other made the betrayal feel even sharper. Michael's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about restoring what was wrongfully taken from the Scott family. For decades, my client's family has been deprived of land that rightfully belonged to them. The defendant, Mr. Johnson, has cultivated and profited from this garden, but it was never his to begin with. We will show that this property was intended to remain in the Scott family's possession, and that my client, Michael Scott, has every right to reclaim it." He gestured toward Michael, who put on an expression of wounded dignity, as though he were a victim of some great injustice. My parents sat behind him, nodding in unison, their faith in him unshaken. I clenched my fists. Then it was Rachel Porter's turn. She didn't waste time on theatrics. She rose from her seat, adjusted her glasses, and spoke with crisp precision. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mr. Johnson purchased this property legally in 1996 from the late Mr. Edward Scott, Michael Scott's grandfather. The deed was notarized, the sale recorded with the county, and taxes have been paid consistently for nearly 3 decades. We have documentation to support every step. This lawsuit is not about justice, it is about greed." Her words sliced through the air like a blade. I saw Michael stiffen. The judge nodded. "We'll proceed with opening evidence." Michael's lawyer presented faded photographs of my grandfather standing near the property line, claiming these proved the land was still in the family. He produced statements from my parents, insisting Grandpa had only loaned the garden to Johnson until his finances improved. It was all circumstantial, flimsy at best, but they delivered it with confidence, hoping repetition would make it sound credible. When Rachel's turn came, she calmly laid out a folder of documents. The original deed of sale, signed and stamped. A ledger of property taxes paid annually by Mr. Johnson. Utility bills tied to his address, proving continuous residence and use. And finally, a signed affidavit from the county clerk who had overseen the transaction all those years ago. The contrast was undeniable. Michael had stories. Johnson had proof. But then came the moment that shifted the entire room. Rachel pulled out a flash drive and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, we request permission to play an audio recording obtained by a neighbor, dated 2 months ago. The judge agreed. Through the speakers, Michael's voice filled the courtroom. I don't care about the damn vegetables. Once I get that land, I'll parcel it off and sell it. Easy cash. Johnson's too old to fight back anyway. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. My mother covered her mouth, eyes wide. My father looked down at his hands, shame creeping into his posture. Michael's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling in an instant. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Scott, is that your voice on the recording? Michael stammered, I was just joking, Your Honor. But no one in the room believed him. The rest of the session was a blur. Rachel questioned Mr. Johnson, who testified with quiet dignity about his years of labor in that garden, about the joy of sharing its harvest with neighbors, and about the pain of being accused of theft by the very family he'd lived beside peacefully for so long. When Michael took the stand, his story faltered under cross-examination. Rachel asked simple, direct questions. Do you have a copy of the deed? Number, did your grandfather ever file a legal claim reserving rights to the property? Number, can you provide any proof beyond family hearsay that this land belongs to you? Number, each no echoed louder than the last. By the time the judge called for a recess, the outcome already seemed clear. I walked out into the hallway, my chest tight. My parents avoided my gaze, but Michael glared at me, his eyes burning with accusation. As if somehow, by being there, by siding with truth, I had betrayed him. But I didn't flinch, because deep down, I knew betrayal had started with him. When the recess ended, the courtroom felt different. People whispered less, leaned in closer, as though everyone knew the case was shifting, the mask slipping off my brother's carefully rehearsed story. I slid back into my seat near the back. Mr. Johnson sat quietly at his table, hands folded, gaze steady. Michael, meanwhile, fidgeted with his tie, whispering angrily to his lawyer. His confidence, the swagger he carried into the building that morning, was gone. The judge returned, adjusted his glasses, and called the session back to order. We will continue with witness testimony, he said. Rachel Porter, Mr. Johnson's attorney, called the first witness, Linda Thompson, the mail carrier for our street for over 15 years. She walked to the stand, her uniform neat, her satchel still over one shoulder as though she had come straight from her route. Mrs. Thompson, Rachel began, in your years delivering mail on Maplewood Drive, have you ever delivered correspondence for Michael Scott to the address of Mr. Johnson's property? Linda shook her head firmly. No, ma'am, never. All mail for Mr. Johnson has always gone to his address. I know every house on that block by heart. And to your knowledge, has Michael Scott ever resided at Mr. Johnson's address? Another shake of the head. Number, not once. Michael's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she might not remember every detail. Linda's reply was sharp. I deliver mail 6 days a week, in sun and snow. If someone lived at that house, I'd know it. And it's always been Mr. Johnson, just him, sometimes his grandchildren in the summer. Nobody else. The courtroom murmured. Another small nail in Michael's case. Next came David Morales, the owner of the local hardware store. He testified that Mr. Johnson had been a loyal customer for decades, purchasing tools, soil, seeds, and materials, all for the upkeep of his garden. "Have you ever seen Michael Scott buying supplies for that property?" Rachel asked. David chuckled. "Michael? Number, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen him buy a single gardening tool. He once came in asking if he could rent space in the back lot for a car flip, but that's about it." The judge scribbled notes. Michael's jaw tightened. Finally, Rachel called her most powerful witness, Caroline Evans, a paralegal who once worked at the county recorder's office. She carried with her a stack of certified documents. "Ms. Evans," Rachel asked, "what do these records show?" Caroline adjusted her glasses. They confirmed that in 1996, Edward Scott, grandfather of the plaintiff, sold a strip of land measuring 20 feet by 50 feet to Mr. James Johnson. The transaction was properly recorded, notarized, and filed. The deed has been updated through the years to reflect continued tax payments. There has been no legal contest to this property in nearly 3 decades, until now. Rachel handed the documents to the judge, who reviewed them silently for several long moments. Then he looked up at Michael. "Mr. Scott, do you have any evidence to contradict these official records?" Michael shifted in his chair, his face flushed. His lawyer leaned close, whispering furiously. At last, Michael muttered, Not right now, Your Honor." The judge's brow furrowed. Rachel wasn't finished. She requested to play a second recording, this time a video taken by a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who lived across the street. The footage, dated just a month before the lawsuit, showed Michael standing at the fence line with a friend, gesturing toward the garden. "Look at this," Michael said in the video, his voice loud and clear. "All this work Johnson put in, it doesn't matter. If I win in court, I can bulldoze the whole thing and sell the lot to a developer. Imagine the cash." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, heads shaking in disbelief. The judge raised his hand for silence. "Order in the court." His tone was sharp, but even he looked weary of the charade. I stole a glance at my parents. My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. My father's shoulders slumped as though a great weight had pressed down on him. I could see the dawning realization, the uncomfortable truth that their son, the one they had defended all their lives, was exposed as a liar before the entire community. When it was Michael's turn to take the stand again, his lawyer tried to rebuild the narrative. "Mr. Scott, can you explain these recordings? Perhaps they were taken out of context?" Michael leaned into the microphone. I was just venting. I didn't mean it seriously. My only goal was to honor my grandfather's memory. He always said that land should stay in our family." Rachel stood immediately. "Objection, hearsay." "Sustained," the judge replied. "The jury will disregard that statement." Michael's face reddened further. He fumbled through his answers, contradicting himself more than once. At one point, he claimed Grandpa never signed any paperwork. Minutes later, confronted with copies of the notarized deed, he admitted he wasn't present for the transaction and couldn't actually know what happened. Each word dug his hole deeper. By the end of the testimony, it was no longer just a property dispute. It was a portrait of greed, lies, and manipulation. When the judge called for closing statements, Michael's lawyer tried desperately to reframe the case as a misunderstanding. But Rachel's closing was clear, steady, and devastating. This is not a misunderstanding. This is an attempt to rewrite history, to take by force what was earned through honest work. The Scotts sold this land. Mr. Johnson purchased it legally, and for nearly 30 years, he has cultivated it with care. This lawsuit is not about justice. It is about envy and entitlement, and the law cannot reward either. The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed heavy, waiting for the gavel. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will take a short recess before rendering its decision." I exhaled. realizing I had been holding my breath. My hands trembled as I looked at Mr. Johnson. He gave me a small, tired smile. In that moment, I understood. No matter how the ruling came down, the truth had already been spoken. And Michael's mask, the one he had worn for so many years, had finally cracked in front of everyone. When the judge re-entered the courtroom after recess, the atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. Everyone leaned forward in their seats. Some neighbors from our street had slipped in during the break, curious to see how the drama would unfold. For them, it was gossip. For me, it was my family tearing itself apart in public. The judge adjusted his robes, tapped the gavel lightly, and began. This court has reviewed the evidence presented, including deeds, tax records, sworn testimony, and recorded statements. His voice was measured, but I caught the faint edge of irritation. The matter at hand is not complicated. The deed clearly shows the property was sold by Edward Scott to James Johnson in 1996. The sale was legal, binding, and recorded. Since then, Mr. Johnson has maintained continuous ownership and paid all property taxes. He paused, his eyes shifting toward Michael. The plaintiff has provided no documentary evidence to support his claim. Instead, the court has heard recordings in which the plaintiff admits his true intentions, to profit by selling the land once obtained. This undermines not only the credibility of his claim, but also the integrity of this proceeding. A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. I could almost feel the weight pressing down on Michael as he sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The judge leaned forward. This court finds the claim brought by Michael Scott to be without merit. The property in question remains the sole and legal possession of James Johnson. Furthermore, the court finds evidence of intentional misrepresentation by the plaintiff, and as such, this matter will be referred to the district attorney for review of possible perjury or fraud charges. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case dismissed. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, like a tide breaking, the room filled with murmurs. Some gasped, others whispered, "I knew it." A few clapped softly before the bailiff barked, "Order!" I turned to look at my parents. My mother sat frozen, hands clenched in her lap, her face pale and tight. My father had his head in his hands, as if the weight of all his misplaced loyalty had finally collapsed on him. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them looked at Michael. And Michael? He sat like a man carved from stone, his jaw locked, his eyes burning holes in the wooden table. Mr. Johnson rose slowly with the help of his cane. Rachel Porter touched his shoulder, congratulating him quietly. He nodded once, his expression calm but weary. Victory didn't erase the months of stress, the humiliation of being accused of theft by people he had once called neighbors. As people began to file out, I stayed seated, almost afraid to move. Then Michael shot up from his chair, his voice sharp and venomous. "This isn't over. That judge was biased. They're all against me." The bailiff stepped forward, ready to intervene, but the judge simply gave Michael a stern look over his glasses. "One more outburst, Mr. Scott, and you will be held in contempt of court." Michael sat back down, seething, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped completely. Everyone in that room saw the truth. My brother wasn't a victim. He was a liar who had tried to weaponize the law for his own greed. I finally stood, my legs shaky, and walked toward Mr. Johnson. He gave me that small smile again, the same one he'd worn during recess, steady and kind. "Thank you for being here, Jennifer," he said softly. I swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry this happened. You didn't deserve any of it." He patted my hand gently. "Sometimes the truth takes the long road, but it always arrives." Those words stayed with me. As we exited the courthouse, the autumn air felt sharp in my lungs. Reporters who had caught wind of the case snapped photos and shouted questions. Michael brushed past them, barking, "No comment!" My parents trailed after him, looking small and lost. I stood on the courthouse steps, the city skyline behind me, watching as the man who had once been my hero, my big brother who taught me how to ride a bike, who used to sneak me candy when Mom wasn't looking, stormed away like a stranger I barely knew. I wanted to chase after him, to ask why. Why had he done this? Why drag us all into his lies? But I already knew the answer. Greed blinds. Entitlement corrodes. And Michael had been feeding both for years until there was nothing left but bitterness. Later that evening, I sat with Mr. Johnson on his porch, the scent of his garden still strong in the cooling air. The rows of tomatoes glistened with dew under the porch light. For him, the verdict wasn't about winning land. It was about protecting his dignity, his years of work, and the simple peace he had built with his own hands. "You know what hurt the most?" he said, his voice low. "It wasn't the lawsuit. It wasn't the lies. It was knowing the people next door, people I thought were friends, could sit in a courtroom and swear against me." I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand," I whispered. Because I did. That same betrayal had split my family apart. That night, back at home, I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out an old photo album. There was Michael at age 12, standing in our yard with dirt on his jeans, holding a pumpkin Mr. Johnson had given him. He'd been so proud that day, smiling like the world was his. How had that boy become this man? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing. The truth had finally been spoken, and it had been heard. The garden still belonged to Mr. Johnson. The lies had withered in the light of evidence, and my brother's reputation, once carefully protected by our parents' blind love, was now in ruins. The truth at last had been revealed. Winning the case should have felt like a relief, but the truth is, when I walked out of that courthouse, the air felt heavier than ever. Yes, Mr. Johnson kept his garden. Yes, Michael's lies had been exposed. But victory in court doesn't mend the cracks betrayal carves into a family. The very next day, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "We need to talk." I drove over to their house that evening. The blinds were drawn, the living room dim except for the glow of a single lamp. Mom sat stiffly in her armchair, arms crossed. Dad stared at the carpet, his shoulders slumped. Michael wasn't there, but his presence hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Mom spoke first, her voice sharp. "You humiliated your brother. You sided with a neighbor over your own blood." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself. I stood by the truth. That land was never ours. Her eyes flashed with anger. "Family should come first, Jennifer, always." I felt my chest tighten. Family should come before lies, before greed. If you can't see that, then maybe we're not talking about the same definition of family. Dad finally looked up. His eyes were tired, rimmed red. "Your brother made mistakes, but he's still our son." "I know he is," I whispered, "and he's still my brother. But being family doesn't give anyone the right to steal, not from neighbors, not from strangers, not from me." No one spoke after that. The silence was thick, painful, filled with everything we couldn't say. I left their house that night knowing something had shifted permanently. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood seemed to move on faster than my family did. People stopped by Mr. Johnson's place more often, bringing him pies, soup, or simply kind words. He became a symbol of resilience on Maplewood Drive, the man who had stood firm against greed and won. As for Michael, he disappeared. Word spread that he had packed up and moved to Nevada, chasing some new scheme. He left behind unpaid debts, bitter whispers, and parents who still clung to the hope that one day he'd come to his senses. But deep down, I knew Michael wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for another shortcut. The holidays came. Thanksgiving felt hollow without Michael's booming laugh, even if it had always been a little too loud, a little too forced. Mom set an extra plate anyway, as though he might walk through the door. He didn't. At Christmas, Dad poured himself one too many glasses of wine and muttered, "Maybe we pushed him too hard. Maybe this is our fault." Mom shushed him, but I could see it too. The guilt eating at them. The confusion of parents realizing they'd defended the indefensible. And me? I found myself spending more evenings on Mr. Johnson's porch. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. One January night, as the snow dusted his dormant garden, he told me something I'll never forget. "You know, Jennifer," he said, his voice soft but steady, "land comes and goes. Crops grow and die, but trust. Once you lose it, it doesn't come back the same. Your brother lost more than this case. He lost his good name." I nodded, my throat tight, because I understood the trial hadn't just changed how the neighbors saw Michael. It had changed how I saw him. For the first time in my life, I didn't see my brother as someone who just made mistakes. I saw him as someone who had chosen dishonesty over and over until it defined him. Spring arrived, and with it, new life in Mr. Johnson's garden. Rows of seedlings sprouted in neat lines, fragile but determined. I helped him some weekends, pulling weeds, hauling bags of soil, planting tomato stakes. Working with my hands in that dirt felt healing, like I was anchoring myself to something real, something honest. Neighbors passing by would wave, sometimes stop to chat. A few whispered words of encouragement to me. "You did the right thing, Jennifer." At first, I brushed it off, but slowly I began to believe it. One afternoon, as we rested under the shade of the porch, Mr. Johnson handed me a small wooden box. Inside were packets of seeds, heirloom tomatoes, basil, peppers. "For your own garden," he said with a smile. "Every home needs a piece of ground that's truly theirs." My eyes stung with tears. "Thank you," I whispered. That evening, I cleared a patch of earth in my backyard and planted the first seeds. It wasn't much, just a few rows of green. But as the days warmed and the shoots pushed through the soil, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about growing food. It was about reclaiming hope after months of betrayal, about choosing to root myself in truth, no matter how messy or painful the fight had been. It's been nearly a year since the trial. My relationship with my parents is strained, sometimes distant but not broken. We still see each other on holidays, though Michael's name hangs in the air like an unspoken wound. Michael hasn't called. Not once. And maybe that's for the best. The garden next door is flourishing. Mine, too, in its small way. And every time I water my plants or pull a weed, I remember the words Mr. Johnson told me, "Trust once lost doesn't come back the same." But I've also learned something else. Truth has roots, deep ones. And no matter how hard someone tries to rip it out, it finds a way to hold. This story was never just about land. It was about family, honesty, and the courage to stand firm even when it means standing alone. And as I sit on my porch on warm summer nights, the scent of fresh basil in the air, I know one thing for certain. I kept my integrity. Mr. Johnson kept his garden, and the truth, quiet, steady, undeniable, won. Sometimes, battles in life aren't fought over money or land, but over truth. Jennifer's story reminds us that no matter how convincing lies may sound, evidence and honesty will always outlast greed. Her brother walked away with nothing but shame, while Mr. Johnson kept not just his garden, but his dignity. And Jennifer? She discovered that standing up for what's right sometimes means standing against your own family. This isn't just a story about property. It's a story about trust, integrity, and the quiet strength it takes to defend them. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for what's yours, even against people you thought you could trust? Share your story in the comments. If Jennifer's courage touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more stories like this, where truth always finds its way back. Because at the end of the day, gardens can be stolen, money can disappear, but your integrity? That's yours to protect, always.